Hello, my friends, and welcome to another edition of our weekly live stream, Uncle Henny's Campfire Stories. I am, of course, Henrik Kuto, your Uncle Henny, and I am very excited to be hanging out with you guys and reading some more family-friendly scary stories from our newest book acquisition, Scary Stories for Sleepovers, number 8. So I'll be here reading some stories, hanging out with you guys in the chat, and accepting your very generous tips, but tipping, of course, is not required. It is just appreciated. And all I ask as you sit and watch and listen is hit the share button and help us get lots of people joining in. So, and I want to say real quick, we already have our first tip. Thank you so much, Craig Cohen, for your generous tip. It's always appreciated when people tip before I'm even streaming. It's very flattering. And no joke, I have bought groceries for the entire month of April just from the tips that I've gotten from doing the show. So thank you guys so much. And the doggies, thank you. They're swarming me right now. You can't quite see them. They're just a little bit too low to be in the shop, but they are swarming me right now. For some reason, they really want my attention. So, but we've got lots of fun people hanging out in the chat. Jason Weinrub said, same here, nice. Ray Cersei, hello, hello. Craig Cohen, hello, Henrik, good evening. Good evening to you too, sir. Jason P. Weinrub said, what's up, Henrik? Gonna read some scary stories. I also want to take a second to thank Morgan Moore, our regular listener, for sending me this Spooky Ohio book. Maybe one of these nights I'll crack into this guy. And you can also hear Morgan's short story on my podcast, Weekly Spooky, but we'll talk about that some more. Manda said, love that voice. Why, thank you. Oh, wow. Wow. Thank you so much, Kevin Slinker, for the shockingly generous tip. You threw me completely for a loop. Thank you so much. Wow. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. CT Van Hoos, I see you're in here. I know that you recently tested positive for the COVID-19. I hope you are comfortable and recovering very well, my friend. Well, now that I'm almost completely thrown out of sorts by the incredible generosity of the tips, holy cow, I guess it's time to continue the ambiance with a little beverage, and then we're going to start our first story. So please hit that share button and let's get some friends in on the fun. Oh, Amanda Slinker said, well, it's me, but I just signed into one of my 2 PayPals I have. I love helping those who make amazing content. Thank you so much, Amanda. I suspected, because that last name isn't super common, but I don't like to assume, because you know what they say when you assume. It's a family-friendly stream. CT Van Hoos said, doing well, brother, thank you. Glad to hear it, my friend. Very glad to hear it. Mark Shields just joined us as well. All right, let's start the first story, and I'll be hanging out between stories and chatting with you guys throughout the night. I also want to mention there'll be links in the chat from David about how you can get your very own Campfire Tales t-shirt. Because of COVID-19, they take a while to ship, but they are absolutely worth it. You get the this little logo right here on a t-shirt. Looks wicked good at henflix.com, but we're not here strictly to sell and to make money and to make tips. We are here for camaraderie and spookies. So, my friends, Scary Stories for Sleepovers number 8. Let's bring in some family-friendly chills. Ooh. And I want to mention, all of these stories are new to me. Let's see. Oh, goodness. This story, my friends, is called Bloodmobile. Vince ran over to the mossy forest floor, turning around to avoid a mammoth boulder. His timing was perfect. The frisbee floated right into his waiting hands. Can you believe we actually talked Mom and Dad into going camping in this beautiful place? He yelled. He straightened his arm and hurled the yellow disc back in the direction from which it had come. Vince's twin brother, Joe, made a mighty leap and snagged the frisbee just before it would have sailed into their tent. Yeah, we're lucky there's 2 of us, he said with a wink. It makes it easier to wear 'em down. He tossed the frisbee back to Vince, who turned and caught the plastic disc. Vince held on to the frisbee, looking at the trees towering overhead with a dreamy expression. "Just think of all the stuff we can do while we're here," he said happily. "As soon as Mom and Dad get back from the camp store, we're going hiking, right? And in the morning, we could go fishing or mountain biking. Then there's that campfire program tomorrow night." Joe rolled his eyes. "All right, man," he said with a grin. "It is pretty cool to be camping, but would you mind shutting up for a minute and just throwing the frisbee back?" Vince shot his twin a mock-hurt expression. "Okay, but if you're going to be a jerk, you're going to have to run for it," he warned, and wound up and flung the frisbee clear over to the next campsite. Joe snickered and shook his head, then turned to fetch the frisbee. His eyes were scanning the thick underbrush for it when he came to a clearing and noticed an old, rusty camper parked under a gnarled oak tree. He examined the vehicle for a second before grabbing the frisbee he'd spotted by the back tire. Then he sprinted back over to Vince, who was still standing by the huge boulder. "Sorry about that throw," Vince said sheepishly. "Never mind about that," Joe answered. He jerked a thumb over his shoulder. "Did you notice the beat-up motorhome under that tree? I don't remember seeing it there yesterday." Vince looked over. "They must have pulled in last night after we were already asleep," he suggested. "Why?" "No reason," Joe said, trying to twirl the frisbee on one finger. "It's just that it kinda smells funny over there, that's all." "It smells funny?" Vince exclaimed. "Like what?" Joe only shrugged, and both boys stared silently over at the campsite. Just then, their parents pulled up the dusty road in the family station wagon. Vince could practically taste the marshmallows, chocolate bars, and graham crackers hidden in the shopping bags in the back seat. The boys rushed over to help with the supplies. "Well," their mom said, "who would like to do some hiking?" "Me! Me!" both the boys responded at once. The walk through the wilderness had not been disappointing. The boys had seen huge fir trees, giant oaks, and a porcupine crossing a fallen tree, and, perhaps best of all, a raccoon that stopped and stared at the foursome before shimmying to the top of a tall pine tree. When the family got back to the campground, it was almost sunset. As they walked past the neighboring campsite, the twins glanced over at the old motorhome, but nothing had changed. "I wonder where they've been all day," Joe whispered to his brother. Vince shook his head. "Maybe they're night people," he replied. As their parents set up the camp stove and started dinner, Vince and Joe crept next door to have a closer look. They walked all around the vehicle, hoping that the curtains would be parted somewhere so they could peek inside. But every window was sealed up tight with thick, black curtains. The boys walked off into the nearby forest. "I see what you mean about the smell," Vince whispered with a little look of disgust. "It smells like something's rotting. And did you notice there are no rearview mirrors on that camper? Not on the side, not even in the cab." Joe narrowed his eyes, looking back at the silent camper. "What kind of people don't have any mirrors on their car and sleep all day?" he wondered aloud. Vince smiled mischievously. "Maybe our neighbors are vampires," he suggested in a spooky voice. Joe was still staring at the motorhome. "Whatever they are," he said, "let's keep an eye on them." That night, the twins lay in their tent until they could hear their parents snoring from the tent next door. Then, they popped their heads up and took turns peeking out their tent's small screened window. After a little while, they heard a long, creaking noise. Both of them crowded to see out the window. The side door of the motorhome opened, and the two figures stepped out into the moonlight. A man and a woman. Their thin bodies moved in slow motion, and their skin reflected a deathly white glow against their black garments. "Maybe they are vampires," Vince whispered, no longer feeling like it was a big joke. "How could we find out?" "I know," Joe said. He began pawing through his backpack, which sat in the corner of the tent. After a few seconds, he came out with a pocket mirror. They held the mirror up to the window and took turns adjusting it so they could see outside. When they looked directly through the window, they could see the weird, bony couple standing motionless under the moon. But when they looked in the mirror, all they could see was some black clothing which appeared to float in the air. The people who had come out of the camper cast no reflection. Panic-stricken, Vince looked at his twin. Now what do we do? He said. I have no idea, Joe answered. But we'd better not let them out of our sight. We'll tell Mom and Dad in the morning. But when they turned back to the window, their neighbors were nowhere to be seen. The twins spent a nearly sleepless night watching the mobile home through their tiny tent window. At any moment they expected the front of their tent to be slashed open by sharp claws, followed by two pale forms flying in through the new opening. But all they did see was the lonely forest, with the needles of pine trees shimmering ever so softly in the white moonlight. The boys were starting to nod off when they heard a familiar creak, followed by the sound of a door shutting. They both came to attention and stared out the window. But they were too late. Their neighbors were already inside. Get up, sleepyheads, their father said, sticking his face into the tent. It's almost 8 o'clock. You're missing a beautiful morning. The boys groaned and rolled over in their sleeping bags. I don't think I've ever been so tired, Vince said after their dad left. Joe flopped onto his belly and propped his head up with one hand. We've got to do something. What if they travel around feeding on campers? I wonder if they've gotten anyone in this campground yet, Vince said, sitting up at the thought. If they have, then they might have created new vampires. We won't stand a chance if there are more than two. Joe frowned, looking out their window at the solitary motorhome. I kinda doubt they've bitten anyone yet, he said. Did you notice how thin they were? They just got here, so they probably haven't started yet, Vince agreed. So, what do we do? We need to get into their motorhome to gather evidence to show Mom and Dad, Joe said firmly, and we need to do it sometime today while the sun is still up. Vince nodded nervously. At the thought of their frightening mission, neither of the boys felt sleepy any longer. They wriggled out of their bags and got dressed. What should we do today, you two? Their mother asked over a breakfast of scrambled eggs and bacon. Want to go fishing? Or how about another hike? I was thinking a picnic would be fun, their dad suggested. The twins looked at one another and swallowed. The same thoughts rushed through both of their heads. They knew they couldn't exactly tell their mom and dad they needed a little time to slip away and take care of a couple of vampires. Mom and Dad would never believe their story anyway, and they realized their parents would get suspicious if they seemed disinterested in their plans. Especially, the hounds are awake. Especially after all the begging that had led up to this trip. I'm up for anything, Vince said with a false cheer. Me too, Joe said. Anything. The family finally decided to explore a nearby trail on their mountain bikes. They planned to make a day of it and packed picnic lunches. The twins exchanged helpless expressions at this turn of events, but neither of them could think of a way out. So off they went, all four of them riding through shady mountain meadows and past tranquil, tree-fringed streams. They found a path that traversed the very ridge of the mountains, and at lunchtime they stopped at a spot where they could see for miles on either side. The forest seemed to spread out away from them in a rolling green carpet of trees. It was the kind of adventure that the twins had been dreaming of for years. Not that either one was able to enjoy himself. The mental image of that rusty motorhome was never too far from their thoughts. As the afternoon wore on, both boys began stealing nervous glances at the sky. The sun always went down early in the mountains, and they knew that time was rapidly running out. Soon the vampires would be stalking for prey. At last, their parents aimed the bikes towards the campground. Most of the early part of the day they had traveled slightly uphill. Now, they raced back down. The twins, anxious to return, took the lead and set roller coaster speeds. Their mother shouted at them a number of times to slow down. Finally, they reached the campsite. The sun still hung in the sky, but it was already touching the top of the pine trees. "Let's tell them we want to take a nap," Vince whispered, just before their parents pulled up. "Maybe that'll give us a chance to sneak away." "We're worn out. How about a little nap before dinner?" Joe asked their mom and dad as they parked their bikes. Their father laughed. "I'm not surprised you need to rest after the speed you were going," he said. "I think a nap would be good for all of us." And that way we'll be well rested for the campfire program tonight," their mother added. The twins sighed in relief as everybody settled into their tents. They waited a few minutes, then, moving as slowly and quietly as they could, they crept back out of their tent. "The sun's almost down," Vince whispered. "We don't have much time." They headed directly to the motorhome, walking carefully so that the sound of crunching pine needles wouldn't give them away. Their hearts pounded as they stood before the side door of the camper. They both could imagine the pale-skinned couple standing right behind the door, waiting to attack. "Let's get this over with," Vince whispered. Joe nodded and grasped the door handle. Unlocked, it turned in his hand, and the door began to creak as it opened. The twins winced at the shrill noise, then both stepped bravely into the gloom. "I can't see a thing," Joe complained in a low voice. Vince looked about, but his eyes weren't adjusting to the darkness. He tried a light switch by the door, but nothing happened. "The electricity must be disconnected," he whispered. "Let's open the drapes." They proceeded to opposite windows, feeling their way blindly through the room. Joe bumped into something flat and hard in the center of the room. They reached out and felt a long wooden box. "It has to be a coffin," he thought in terror. An occupied coffin! He quickly moved away to where he thought the window would be. Both boys reached the curtains at the same time and tried to tug them open, but they wouldn't budge. The fabric had been nailed into place. Suddenly, there was a stirring of noise from the center of the dark vehicle. "Hurry!" Vince yelled, no longer bothering to speak quietly. "Force the drapes open!" The boys pulled frantically on the curtains, but they still wouldn't move. The stirring grew louder. A thin squeaking announced the opening of a lid. The twins frantically pulled at the drapery with all their weight. All at once, there was a ripping sound. As first Vince's, then Joe's curtains came tearing off the walls. The boys stared at the center of the room, where two red-eyed creatures were raising from a pair of black coffins. But something was different about them tonight. They were plump, not thin, and blood was smeared on each of their faces like fresh strawberry jam. The creatures flew from their caskets like jack-in-the-boxes, one reaching for Vincent, the other for Joe. But just before the vampires could touch them, the light shifted, and the last dying rays of the afternoon sunlight streamed through the window and fell upon them. Instantly, there was a sickening burning smell in the motorhome, and the creatures' red eyes rolled back into their heads. Horrid shrieks tore from their mangled mouths as their pale skin blackened and fell off in smoking scraps. In another instant, their bones collapsed and turned into seething ashes on the floor. Shuddering in fear and revulsion, the twins bolted out the door into the forest. Darkness had shrouded the campsite. Suddenly, a hand fell on each of their shoulders. Both twins screamed and backed away, but it was only their father. Their mother stood next to him, with her hands on her hips. "You two have some explaining to do," their dad said angrily. Their mom stepped closer. "What were you doing in that motorhome?" she snapped. "And what's that burning smell?" We'll tell you everything," Joe cried. "But first, let's get back to camp and pack up before it's too late." The parents looked at him as if he'd gone crazy. "What are you talking about?" their mom added. The boys blurted out the whole story, emphasizing the part about the blood smeared over the vampires' faces. "Now the important thing is for us to get out of here," Vince said. "Yeah," Joe added, "because those things were full of blood before the sunlight killed them. They might have turned someone else around here into a vampire." Their father rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "I don't know how much of this I believe," he finally said, "but I do agree with one thing. I think we should go home before spending one more night here." Behind him, their mother agreed. The family struck the tents and packed things up as quickly as they could, since it was almost completely dark. By the time the twins were sitting in the back seat of the station wagon and their parents had taken their places in the front, a full moon had risen over the pines along the ridge, shining cold white light on the trail the family had ridden earlier that day on their mountain bikes. For the first time in nearly 24 hours, Vince was beginning to feel normal again. He leaned forward and said to his parents, "Thanks for believing in us, guys." "Yeah," said Joe, slapping a hand on his father's shoulder. "No one else would have believed." Smiling, he glanced at his dad in the rearview mirror and felt the blood rush out of his legs. His father cast no reflection. Joe leaned forward and grabbed the mirror, angling it to his mother's direction. She, too, was absent in the oblong mirror. Oh. All right, well, I accomplished Goosebumps on the first story. That is a record for me. Some fun with vampires. Let's see what you guys are saying in the chat. Let's see what we got going on. Wow, you guys have been busy. Oh, thank you so much, Shane Migliavaca, for your very generous tip. I really do appreciate it. Definitely helps warm me up on a cold winter's night. And thank you so much, Morgan Moore, for ordering 2 t-shirts. You can check out, I'm sure you've already seen the link, but we do have t-shirts for sale with this rad logo right on the shirt. It's really cool. Unfortunately, it can take about 2 weeks to arrive right now because, the factories aren't very busy due to COVID. So let's see what we got going on in here. We got a great group. Let's see. Let's see what the comments are. Chris Cooley said, "Spooky." Good call, David. Linking and driving. Oh yeah. So David was driving. Well, All right. Let's see. Shane Migliavaca said, "This is how a wrong turn movie starts." Ray Cersei said, "Choose nails." Fair. David Nair said, it was plugging the t-shirts. Michelle said, "Maybe they're nice vampires." Well, we never do find out, do we? Mark Shields said, "Don't invite them in, Dad." I wonder if the vampire rule where you have to invite them in, I wonder if that applies to camping tents. I mean, I know that legally speaking, if you're sleeping in a tent, it is legally your domicile. But I don't know if vampires follow Western law per se. Then again, you can insert a joke about lawyers there. Morgan Moore said, "I hear the vampire alarms." Fair. Let's see. Shane Migliavaca, "Maybe they're just goths." Ray Cersei said, "Oh no!" And Michelle said, "Wait, are they not gonna die?" Well, so one important vampires. One important thing to point out about these scary stories for sleepovers books, because this is, I think, our 5th or 6th week doing Campfire stories, and we've been reading scary stories for sleepovers books, which are a lot of fun. These were published in the 90s for kids to read at parties. We read 2 of them already, and now we're reading another one. We picked them kind of at random, but almost all of these stories involve the kids meeting fate at the end, which I believe makes perfect sense, because that's what that's like what makes a slumber party sleepover story scary. It's not everybody getting away and their resolution. It's the kid getting eaten alive by a werewolf. It's the kid being trapped in a box, underground. That's the stuff that makes a sleepover story scary. Rebecca Randolph said, "That was good. Thank you. I enjoyed it too." Jason P. Weinrub said, "The ending was great." Agreed. Heather Fairchild said, "Leah and I are here. Hey, you guys, thank you so much for listening." Jeff McClellan said, "Do vampires keep lawyers on retainer?" I don't even know if vampires are willing to stay in close company with lawyers. It's probably too immoral for them. Tanya Stiles asked, "What we reading?" We're reading Scary Stories for Sleepovers number 8. I'll be starting another chapter here in just a moment. I just wanted to make sure that if anybody tipped, I said thank you, because sometimes it's easy to miss one. So, all right, we're about to start another story. But before we do, I do want to mention, obviously, tipping is appreciated, but not mandatory. And you guys have been extremely generous tonight with tips via PayPal and Venmo. Thank you so much. And also, we have merchandise available, things like that. If you like listening to narrated stories, by the way, I also have a podcast that publishes every week called Weekly Spooky. It is not family friendly like this is, but you can check it out at weeklyspooky.com. Shane Migliavacca does a lot of stories on there, and Morgan Moore had his first short story read on the show. Oh, his first short story that was narrated on the show. So here we go, you guys. It's time for another story, and then I'll jaw at you some more. And make sure you hit the share button. That's super important. We want lots of people to join us so we can have a good time indoors. Or at least relatively indoors. All right. Ooh, okay. I'm curious about this one. This story. Oh, Katie said hello. Hello, Katie. Great job on your reading. Craig Cohen said, what will win out? The parents' love for their kids or their thirst for blood? We may never know. All right. This story, my dear friends, is called Bone Girl. Where are they? Robin wondered, tightly holding onto the straps of her school backpack. She studied the street ahead as she walked, trying to pick out their hiding place. Behind that car in the next driveway? Under the low hedge bordering the yard across the street? She only had to take a few more steps before she found out. Suddenly, a boy's voice rang out from behind the fence as she was passing. "Hey, Bone Girl!" the kid yelled. "Why don't you get some flesh to cover those bones of yours?" The outburst was followed by a short chorus of giggles, then the sound of feet racing away from the fence and cutting across the yard to the next street. Robin sighed and shook her head, never once slowing her steady stride. Who had it been this time? Brian Clark? Rosie Redlin? It could have been any of them. Every day, either on the way to school or on the way home, it was the same thing. A certain group of kids would sneak up and try to scare her or tease her about the bones. Robin would have done anything to stop them, but she knew that once she had a nickname like Bone Girl, it was pretty hard to shake. After another few houses, she made a sharp turn and marched past the neglected roses and up the brick walkway of her home. She fished a key out of her jumper pocket and let herself into the bone house. At least, that's what those kids called it. There was good reason, too. Robin's living room was full of animals, birds, and people. Just their bones, that is. Each skeleton hung from a special support. The smaller skeletons, those of squirrels, cats, and foxes, rose from the tiny poles mounted on platforms. The larger ones, such as the gorilla and the human, hung from strings dangling from customized hangers, making them look like huge white marionettes. Higher, lined up along the ceiling as if trying to reach some ghoulish nest, the bones of birds in flight hung suspended from thin, strong wire. Occasionally, Robin would spot a town kid standing across the street, trying to catch a glimpse into the bone house. She could never understand why anyone would care, but she couldn't understand her father's fascination with studying skeletons either. "Don't look at them like that," he always said when he caught her sneering at one of the precious specimens, as he liked to call them. "You have to respect them." Remembering his words, Robin made a sound like escaping steam. Sure, she thought, like you can really respect a room full of dead things. Ignoring the cold stares the creatures cast at her from their eyeless sockets, she marched right past them and into the kitchen to prepare an afternoon snack. In a few minutes, she sat at the table munching on a tuna sandwich. Not 2 feet from her chair stood the bones of a timber wolf, with sharp fangs glinting in the warm light slanting through the kitchen window. On a wall right over the table itself in a decorative display case lay coiled the fragile skeleton of an 8-foot rattlesnake. Robin dug hungrily into her sandwich, not giving the skeletons a second glance. When she was through, she headed into the study. There she curled up on the couch located between the fearsome towering skeletons of a pair of grizzly bears and did her homework. At about 6 o'clock, her dad came home. He wandered into the study carrying a big box and stared at Robin with a distracted expression. With his frizzy gray hair and thick glasses, he looked like the absent-minded professor that he was. Actually, Dr. Tim Meza was a scientist for the county museum. "You won't believe what I picked up today," he said, nodding toward the box in his arms. With infinite care, he set it on the carpet, then slowly split the box's seal with a pocket knife. The box was filled with styrofoam packing material. Ever so gently, he reached in and withdrew the mounted skeleton of a bobcat, setting it down on the floor at their feet. "Real cool, Dad," Robin said, boredom in her voice. Her father didn't seem to notice her disinterest. Instead, he spent the next 15 minutes lecturing her on the bobcat's marvelous skeleton, pointing out how perfectly it was adapted for hunting, with its large jaws, wide hindquarters, and thick leg bones. All while Robin just nodded tiredly. She had heard it all before. "Dad," she said when he had finally finished, "I need some fatherly advice." He blinked and looked at her curiously. "Advice?" "Yes," she said. "There's a group of kids at school who are teasing me. They call me Bone Girl and—" "Oh, they're probably just scared of my collection," he scoffed. "People are always scared of what they don't understand." "Well, what do you suggest I do about it?" Robin wanted to know. Her father shrugged. "Educate your friends about skeletons. After they learn a few things, they won't be scared any longer." His voice trailed off and he tenderly picked up the bobcat, looking about the study for a good place to put it. Robin brightened. "That just might work," she said, turning it over in her mind. "Maybe I can bring some of the kids by the house. Once they see the skeletons up close, maybe they won't be so scared of them." Her father's attention was suddenly riveted on Robin. "Here?" he asked, stunned. "You want to bring a group of children through this house to gawk at my collection?" "Well, you said," Robin sputtered. "I was thinking you could give your friends a little lecture at school or something," he said sharply. "But bringing a crowd here would turn this house into a circus sideshow. That would most certainly not be treating the skeletons with respect." "Don't forget what I've always told you, Robin. Skeletons must be treated with respect." With that, Dr. Meza marched into the front room, holding his new bobcat skeleton as gently as one might carry a carton of eggs. The next day, Robin sat in her history class, staring blankly at the blackboard. The teacher was reviewing the reign of Alexander the Great, but Robin hadn't heard a word he said. She was too busy pondering her problem, how to get certain people to know her as Robin instead of Bone Girl. She thought of her father's advice and tried to imagine herself marching to the front of the class to give a nice lecture about skeletons to everyone. "Yeah, right, Dad," she thought, shaking her head. Suddenly, Robin was aware that Rosie Redlin, who sat at the next desk, was watching her. Rosie was one of the leaders of the group that tormented her. Others were also looking in her direction, but when Robin turned to catch their gaze, they glanced away, snickering. She guessed what was going on. After all, she'd seen those knowing expressions often enough. Someone in the group had played a joke on her, and the others were waiting for her to discover it. They seemed to be staring down at the notebook under her fingers, so Robin figured out that something had been placed inside it. It wouldn't be the first time they'd slipped a cruel note into her notebook. At the front of the classroom, the teacher droned on about Alexander's wonderful empire while no one listened. Instead, most of the class was watching Robin, and Robin was trying to decide what to do. The smartest thing would probably be to check her notebook later so she wouldn't be giving any of them the satisfaction of seeing her reaction. She glanced at the closed cover. What had they put in there anyway? She held off as long as she could, but the suspense was too much. She quickly opened the notebook to find a crude drawing of a skeleton. It was holding a little bag marked candy. There was writing at the top of the page as well. "Hey, Bone Girl," it said. "We can guess what you're going to be for Halloween." A whisper of amusement went through the room. Robin knew if she looked now, the others in the group would be nudging each other and grinning. But for once, she didn't care. And she almost couldn't keep from grinning herself. The picture had given her the perfect idea. She looked up at the calendar on the wall and began to count down how many days were left until Halloween. "I'm going to be gone for 3 days next week," Robin's father told her that night. The pair were sitting in the living room, lightly dusting the skeletons with soft rags. It was a weekly ritual. "I've got a museum convention." Usually, such an announcement would have upset Robin. She hated it when her dad went away to his little bone conventions, leaving her alone for days at a time. Her father was kind of a forgetful man, and she sometimes worried that he'd get so wrapped up in studying his skeletons that he'd forget all about her and never come home at all. Tonight, however, none of that bothered Robin. In fact, as far as she was concerned, her dad's timing couldn't have been better. "Which days will you be gone?" Robin asked, casually. She had been dusting the huge grinning crocodile skull on the floor, and her hand... The hounds go nuts. And her hand paused now as she waited for his answer. Her father frowned. I don't remember," he said. He groped for a paper in his shirt pocket and pushed his glasses down on his nose so he could read through his bifocals. "Looks like the 29th, 30th, and 31st. I'll be back the morning of the 1st. "Great," Robin blurted out. Then, noticing her father's surprised expression, she added, "I mean, I'll miss you. What will you be studying this time?" He thought for a second. "Oh, it's a seminar on the various foods that strengthen bones," he beamed, and he proceeded to give her a little lesson on the subject right on the spot. His hands smoothed down his wild hair as he spoke. Robin listened half-heartedly for a few minutes until she had finished dusting the croc skeleton. Then she excused herself to do her homework. But when she got upstairs to her room, she didn't open her textbooks at all. Instead, she turned on her computer and opened up a graphics program. She typed away for nearly an hour, experimenting with different type styles and inserting illustrations. Finally, she was done. Robin took the first copy off the printer and studied it. "Trick or treat party at the Bone House. Come to Robin Mesa's place on Halloween night at 6 o'clock for a party you'll never forget, if you dare." Robin smiled at the finished product. Yes, this would do. After this challenge, there wouldn't be a single kid in the group who would dare not come. She got out a box of envelopes and began addressing them. Robin had a feeling her father was right about people being scared of what they don't understand, so her number one goal was to show them the skeletons close up. She didn't plan on giving any of her father's usual talks on how skeletons are the infrastructure of the body itself, or about what a marvel it is how one part of the body so perfectly supports another. Kids would not be interested in learning stuff like that, especially on Halloween. All she wanted to do was give them a little scare. Then show them how harmless her father's collection was. She hoped that when they'd stop calling her Bone Girl, Finally, Halloween night arrived and Robin was ready. She took a last look around the house to make sure everything was in place. Then she checked her watch. It was almost 6 o'clock. Excited and a little nervous, Robin ran to the front door where she watched for her guests out the peephole. Soon, she saw a cluster of classmates wandering up the walk. Robin smiled. All 8 of the kids she'd invited had come. She watched as they looked this way and that, noticing the fake webs and giant rubber spiders she'd put in the rose bushes. Then they walked up the front porch and stopped dead. Robin smiled, although she couldn't quite see what was going on because of the angle of the little peephole in the door. She knew that they had come upon her first big surprise. There, crouched in the shadows by the doorbell, she had carefully set up the towering gorilla skeleton. Cradled in its long finger bones was a carved jack-o'-lantern, a candle flickering inside. Carrying the gorilla out had been a real chore, and she still remembered the way its huge jaw had come loose and flapped up and down as she moved it. She had imagined it was a live animal trying to snap at her. Robin watched as the kids finally turned to knock on the door, and she eagerly opened it. Rosie Redlin was the first one inside. "Great pumpkin holder," she said, nodding at the gorilla on the porch. "Thanks," Robin said. It was the first compliment Rosie had ever paid her. Robin smiled and faced the other guests. "Come on in, everyone," she said, "and I'll show you around the Bone House." Robin shut the door behind them, taking in the kids' surprised expressions as they looked about. She had hoped they would react like this. She'd entirely draped the walls of the front room with trash bags, torn trash bags, stapled end to end and hanging from wooden beams on the ceiling. The effect created a dark, mysterious space with only chairs and a card table in sight. Robin moved to one wall. The kids followed her, wide-eyed, wondering what she had planned. She grabbed hold of a section of the overhead trash bags. First, "These are some of the family pets," she announced, and with a sharp tug, she wrenched several of the bags loose. They fell like a theater's curtain, revealing a few feet of wall and floor beyond. The others stared. Before them stood some of the smaller skeletons, such as the squirrels, the cat, and the cats. Around each of their necks, Robin had attached a collar and leash, and there were some old dog bowls on the floor. The stark white bones caught the light and glimmered. The little scene looked like a kennel of ghost animals. "Whoa!" Brian Clark exclaimed. "I've always wondered, are these things real skeletons, Robin?" "Of course," she said. "My dad is Dr. Meza. He's an expert on skeletons at the museum, so he always keeps a bunch of them at home to study." The others nodded uncertainly, and Robin led them further into the room. "Enough of the animals for now. How would you like to meet a human skeleton?" She watched as the kids' eyes grew wider. Before they could answer, she ripped away another section of the trash bags to unveil the adult male skeleton. She had placed a top hat from her father's closet on its head and draped a cape about its shoulder bones. The group was speechless, but Robin wasn't about to stop there. "You've always called me Bone Girl just because we have all these skeletons in our house. Now you can see what a real bone person looks like," she said, teasingly. "The skeleton is a symbol of death," Rosie said. Whoops, did I skip a page? No. "The skeleton is a symbol of death," Rosie finally said. "Doesn't it kind of give you the creeps living in a house with so many of them?" "Nah," Robin answered truthfully. "They do look a little weird at first, but they can't hurt you. Look, I'll prove it. Come and shake its hand, unless you're afraid." Rosie paused for a second, then bravely reached out and grasped the skeleton's fingers. Quickly, she drew her hand away and wrinkled her nose. Then a grin filled her face. "Weird, it feels like cold wood." "Oh, let me try next," Monica Atwood begged. "Then me," added Brian Clark. "Wow," Monica said a second later. "Bones really do feel like cold wood." Robin stood back, enjoying her moment of victory. The kids were actually standing in line for a chance to shake the skeleton's hand. A second later, however, the smile faded from her face. When she glanced up at the human skull, she thought she noticed some strange shadows flicker in the deep hollows of its eye sockets. But that was ridiculous, she decided. The illusion must have been created by the shadows of her party guests. In a few minutes, Robin led the kids to the chairs and told them to sit. "I thought we could play a party game," she said. "Who wants to go first?" A boy named Alex raised his hand. Robin noticed that he had been the last one to touch the skeleton, and she figured he now wanted the others to think he wasn't scared. "Okay, Alex," Robin said. "Take this." She pressed a length of small bones, all joined by a thin wire, into Alex's palm. A gummy wad of something clung to the bone at one end. "What is this?" he asked, horrified. "It's just a tail," Robin said casually, "with some gum on it to make it stick." She walked off and yanked back all of the trash bags at the end of the room. Against the far wall was the skeleton of a timber wolf, its sharp teeth menacing. It was missing its tail. "Here, put this over your eyes," Robin said, tossing a bandana at Alex. "It's time to play stick the tail on the timber wolf." Alex obediently blindfolded himself, and the others spun him around. He tottered hesitantly across the room, holding out the tailbone with shaking fingers. He grew especially nervous when he drew close to the standing bones of the wolf, and he attached the tail to the first thing he felt. When he removed the bandana, he saw the tail dangling from the wolf's jaw. The others chuckled weakly. "That wasn't too good, Alex," Robin scolded. "Well, who's next?" For the next half hour or so, the kids took turns being blindfolded and groping around the room with the tailbone. The group was quiet at first, but by the end, everyone was hooting and laughing. "Good tries, everyone," Robin said. "Now, anybody up for some Refreshments? And with that, she reached up and tore away all the remaining trash bags. Beyond were the rest of her father's specimens, posed in ways that he never would have imagined in his worst nightmares. The huge yellowish bones of a grizzly bear held out a punch bowl filled with fruit juice and ice. At its feet, the thin bones of a rattlesnake curled around a tower of paper cups. The fox skeleton and the bobcat balanced platters of candy in their jaws, and next to them loomed the other grizzly bear, holding a tin of cookies in one fleshless paw and a stack of paper plates in the other. Even Robin had to admit to herself that the scene she had created was unbelievably weird. But by now, her party guests were growing used to the sights in the bone house. Most of them just chuckled appreciatively and went forward to sample the treats. "Do you have any napkins, Robin?" Alex asked. She smiled. "Sure," she said, "but you'll have to jump for 'em." She pointed up where a line of skeleton birds hovered just overhead. Each one had a napkin in its beak. The kids laughed again. The kids laughed again, shaking... Sorry, the doggies came into the room and startled me. Shaking their heads and began bounding into the air for their napkins. "You thought of everything," Alex said, grinning. Soon the food was gone, and Robin's party guests had to leave. They were all kinder to Robin than they'd ever been before. Kinder. And each one thanked her for an unforgettable Halloween party. At last, the crowd headed to the porch. Rosie was the last one out. "Hey, Robin," she said, patting her on the shoulder. "We always thought you were kinda weird, but you're all right, girl." Robin shut the door, raising both fists into the air. "Yes," she said. The night had gone exactly as she planned. She peered out of the peephole again so she could watch the group heading down the walk. They wouldn't be bothering her anymore. She had neatly solved her problem. Robin watched until her new friends passed out of sight into the dark Halloween night. She sighed happily. Now it was time for cleanup. Her dad might not think she'd been exactly respectful of his collection if he saw the way it was now, Robin chuckled. Turning from the door, Robin bent down to pick up a trash bag at her feet, but all at once she straightened up, alarmed. Her eyes blinked over and over as she stared out at the front room. The trash sacks lay wadded on the floor. The table and chairs stood just as they'd been, and the empty punch bowl and crumpled paper cups lay scattered on the table. But the special support stands were empty. There was not one skeleton anywhere in the room. "Hey," Robin said, frowning. "What's going on?" Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a pale blue blur of motion coming at her. She turned, but before she could focus on it, the lights were snuffed out. A hollow, almost musical sound seemed to be surrounding her. "That sounds like wind chimes," she thought in confusion. Or bones clinking together. Suddenly she felt things clutching at her. Hard, claw-like things, plucking at the skin of her arms and her neck and her face. The things felt very much like cold wood. The next morning, Dr. Meza let himself into the house. "I'm home," he shouted. There was no answer. "That's funny. Where's that daughter of mine?" he wondered. He set down his suitcases and walked into the front room. Everything seemed okay. The room was clean and all the skeletons were in their places. He rounded the corner. "Robin Muriel?" he yelled, using her full name. Dr. Meza stuck his head into the study. She wasn't there either. But all his specimens were just as they should be. In the hall, he stopped, surprised, combing his fingers through his gray hair. A new skeleton stood before him. It was set up on a stand right at the base of the stairs. The faintly pink bones appeared to be those of a human girl. But for the life of him, Dr. Meza could not remember when or where he got it. Oh, that one got me. I got some good ones on that one. Oh man. Let's see what you guys are saying. That one got me real good. Proud to say that that one got me real good. All right, it's loading. Let's see what you guys are saying. All right. Wow, we got a lot of comments on this one. Let's see. Ray Cersei said bullies are not cool, and I agree. Rachel Rodolphe said, I want to live in the bone house. I was thinking of you the entire time I was reading this. Shane Migliavacca said, Little Miss Leatherface. Ray Cersei, I am not sure tuna and bones go together. Michelle said, okay, real talk. Is putting dead things on display in your house really respecting them, Dad? Well, that's why you're the daughter and he's the father. Tony Giannot said, I'm here. Sorry I'm late. No problem. Happy to have you here. Ray Cersei, these kids are so mean. Very fair. She also said puppies because I got scared by one and they were barking. Morgan Moore, I hope she dresses as Red Death. David Neuer said, Henwolf's trying to tell him there's bone people outside, but he'll never know. What? Jason Weinram, I like how the dogs are barking in the background. Well, you know, they're union dogs, so they only do that a little bit every hour. Raymond Lawson said, take it off. Ray Cersei said, this is bad bananas, man. Fair point. Jason said, this reminds me of a Goosebumps episode where a young girl wore a scary mask and it became part of her. Yes, the mask. That was a good one. The haunted mask, I believe. Ray Cersei, top hat on those skeletons, gonna eat her. Michelle Antisocial, gotta say, this is a pretty elaborate plan. I'll be sad when they come to life and kill her. Well, you win. Shane Migliavacca said, does that make him her bone daddy? You guys were having a lot of fun with this story in the chat. Mark Shields says, okay, this would be a cool party. For now. And then Ray Cersei said, oh, here it comes. Morgan Moore said, that was a good one. I agree. Keith Thomas said, missed the first part of your broadcast. Would you mind starting over? Oh, Keith. Mark Shields, unintended consequences. Exactly. Jason said, interesting ending. And Shane Migliavacca said, if only she knew Ash, he can deal with skeletons. That's true. Ash has no problem dealing with skeletons. All right. Well, I would ask how you guys are doing, but clearly you're having a lot of fun because that was a chat room I would call lit. The chat was definitely lit right there. I'm gonna have a little bit of water, and then we'll do a few more. We've got until 10 o'clock, my friends. Got a sleeping dog right there. My throat was getting just a little bare there for a second. So, let's see. What are we going to do next? I do want to mention, of course, tipping options are available down below. We have PayPal and Venmo. We have t-shirts available. The links will be in the chat. Thank you guys so much. All of you have already bought some t-shirts. Oh, thank you, Ray Cersei, for the tip. And she put in the note, oh, the lovely bones. them bones, them dry bones. Thank you very much, Ray. So let's see. But yeah, tipping is not required. It's just appreciated very much. You guys have been incredibly generous every single week. And it's awesome, and I really appreciate it. Because there's no more fun way to spend my Wednesday night. That is for sure. So, Keith Tomlin just sent a tip in too. Thank you so much, Keith. Did you leave a smart alecky note? I have a feeling you did. Oh, he didn't. Very great dishonor there, Keith. No snarky comment. But, Patrick said, aw, Henny's at it again, y'all. Every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. I'm gonna be here. At least for the foreseeable future, because let's be real, we all need to have some good, safe fun at home. I think the dogs wanted some milk bones. That's funny, Heather. Thank you. So, I'm going to start this next story. And while I'm doing the story, the other thing you can do that I hugely appreciate is just hit that share button on your Facebook and share this. And leave a little comment in there telling people what we're doing, that you're having fun listening to some scary stories. They're family friendly. You can listen with your kids. But for now, my friends, let's see what the next story is in Scary Stories for Sleepovers, number 8. This has been a solid book. For those of you who join me every week, this one's been really good. Keith said, sorry I forgot I brought shame to my whole family. Well, ooh, here's a setting I don't think we've been to in any of the live streams, although maybe sort of. We did one that was in Hawaii, but here we go. This story is called Things from the Jungle. At last, Benjamin was finished sweeping. He scooped up the plant clippings, spilled the fertilizer and planting soil, and deposited them in a big trash bag. Now all he had left to do was empty the waste baskets. He took a second to look nervously around the nursery, especially into the mysterious green shadows behind him. Then allowed himself a little break, leaning on his broom. His eyes wandered over the plants filling the nursery, and finally settled on the big sign bolted to the beam overhead, lit up in neon so that people could see it at night through the store's front window. Things from the Jungle, the sign read, a pale green glow reflecting off the glass. The name had been his mother's idea. Everything had been her idea. Just think, Benjamin, she'd said only 2 years ago, a nursery stocked with exotic plants shipped directly from Africa. This town is filled with wealthy people who'll pay top dollar for something really unusual to put in their yards. And she'd been right, of course. Even though there were just 2 of them to run it, Things from the Jungle had been successful since the day it opened. Benjamin sighed, then looked behind him again into the huge warehouse where the plants were stored and cared for. It looked like a jungle. It looked like a jungle, all right, with colorful flowers everywhere, vines looping from fluffy bushes, and banana trees rising all over it. But when Benjamin looked back at the vast leafy space, especially now at night, when the thick plants seemed to go on forever, he always had the same strange thought. Something is watching me. Benjamin had that feeling now. He found himself staring into the green shadows, half expecting a pair of predatory eyes to glint back at him. He shook his head and put the broom and dustpan back into the closet. Grow up, he chided himself. There's nothing back there. But as usual, trying to be logical did no good at all. And he quickly finished emptying the waste baskets and headed out the front door. Relieved to be finished, Benjamin took a deep breath of crisp air outside the warehouse. Then he took the trash sack to the open dumpster out back. But as he hefted the bag over the lip of the dumpster, he saw a strange shadow out of the corner of his eye. A man was standing, motionless, just to the side of the dumpster. "Chester!" Benjamin yelled when he saw who it was. "You almost scared me to death!" Chester shrugged, toyed with a strand of his long white hair, then slowly walked away down the alley. As he watched the old man, Benjamin supposed every neighborhood had a homeless guy like Chester. He just wished that this one didn't have to spend so much time hanging around the nursery. Benjamin closed the dumpster's lid and walked the 50 feet between the family business and the family home. A small, single-level house he and his mom had lived in ever since she opened Things from the Jungle. Inside was evidence of his mother's green thumb. Every surface, from the television to the refrigerator, was covered with the potted plants she'd personally grown from clippings in the nursery. The little plants, miniature versions of the huge untamed ones in the warehouse, made Benjamin's home look like a jungle too. Everything all cleaned up there, Ben?" his mother called out. Benjamin came into the den to join her. She was sitting at their craft table, her fingers working to pack a little green vine into the soil of a ceramic pot. "Yeah, Mom," he answered. "It's all ready for the morning." His mother dribbled some water into a newly potted plant from a watering can, then set it aside. Finally, she pulled off a paper towel to wipe the planting soil from her fingers. "Well, I'm gonna turn in," she said, nodding up at the wall clock. "There's a truck coming in early tomorrow, and I have to open the warehouse for the drivers to unload new plants." After exchanging a goodnight kiss, they both retired to their bedrooms. But Benjamin had trouble falling asleep. He couldn't stop thinking of the big semi-trucks that brought new exotic plants and trees to the nursery once a month. He knew these trucks loaded up from boats that came directly from Africa, but he'd always had a weird suspicion that the shipments sometimes contained a little more than the plants he and his mother had ordered. After tossing and turning for about an hour, Benjamin lay on his side, staring off through his window at the nursery warehouse. Even from here, it felt as if something inside were watching him from beyond the dark windows. Watching and waiting. When Benjamin got home from school the next afternoon, the entire nursery looked different. They had received an unusually large shipment with so many plants arriving on the truck that even the huge warehouse couldn't hold them all. The overflow spilled out into the small showroom near the front door and even into his mom's tiny office at the side. Everywhere he looked was a mass of green, curling green ferns, low flats of twisting green grasses, and green trees hanging with strange fruits. His mom's face peeked from between a pair of shaggy bushes. "Hi, Ben," she said with an exhausted but happy smile. "Boy, have we been busy. With all these new plants, I've been hooking up extensions to drip lines all day. And look at all the customers." Ben nodded. There was quite a crowd of people wandering through the place, admiring the new arrivals. Word always seemed to get out whenever things from the jungle received a new shipment. "Give me a few minutes to put my school stuff away," he told her, "and I'll be right out to help you." "Thanks, honey," she said, winking at him. "I knew I could count on you." When Benjamin came back out, Mrs. Gerard was the first customer to catch his eye. "There you are, Ben," the plump older woman said. "I've been waiting for you." She lived only 2 blocks away and had been one of their regular customers from the very beginning. About twice a month, she walked to the nursery, purchased a plant or two, and then sent her husband to pick them up by car later. Mrs. G, as she liked to be called, waved her hand about the room. "I've never seen this place so full of greenery," she exclaimed. "Would you be a dear and show me some of the new things?" Benjamin smiled and directed Mrs. G around, bending to check a price tag on a dwarf fruit tree or to explain how to care for a flowering vine. His mom had taught him quite a bit about plants, and he could identify almost every shrub in the place. Finally, Mrs. G stopped him. "I love everything you've shown me," she said, "but I can't buy them all. Let me have a few minutes alone to think about it, will you?" Benjamin nodded, watching as she strolled off into the warehouse, a wistful smile on her face. Then he went off to help a new customer. They finally closed at 6 o'clock. After the doors were shut and the open sign was turned around, Benjamin's mom looked at him and raised her eyebrows. "I've got a good feeling about this," she said, turning with a dramatic flourish and pushing the button that opened the cash register drawer. She reached in and took a minute to count the money inside. Then she looked up. "We just had a record day, Ben," she beamed. She took the money and slipped it into a folder, then reached over to affectionately tussle Benjamin's hair. "Thanks for all your help," she grinned. "Tell you what if you do a real quick cleanup tonight while I deposit this money at the bank? Then I'll pick up a pizza on the way home. I think we deserve it." While his mother was gone, Benjamin became lost in his work. As he swept up the fallen leaves, his mind mulled over the day's activities, and his stomach rumbled with the thought of a pizza dinner. But somewhere near the very rear of the warehouse, where the plants were so thick you couldn't see one sight of civilization, he stopped cold. High in the trees overhead, he heard a distinct rustling noise. It sounded as if some large animal was suddenly moving from branch to branch. Benjamin stared up in wonder, expecting to see... what? Nothing except the usual canopy of jungle trees greeted his eyes. The noise stopped just as suddenly as it had begun. Benjamin looked around the huge plant-filled space. He was certain he was not alone, but no matter how long he paused, his heart booming in his chest, the noise did not repeat itself. The only things he could hear were the crickets sawing away in the darkness outside, the occasional light whooshing sound of the timed drip lines going off at various parts of the warehouse to water the plants. Finally, Benjamin gathered his courage and finished his sweeping. Then, with shaking hands, he turned off the warehouse lights, locked up, and walked home. In the middle of their pizza dinner, the phone rang. Benjamin watched his mom's smile melt from her face during the conversation. At the end of the conversation, she dropped the slice of pizza she had been eating onto her plate. It was clear she'd lost her appetite. "That was the police," she said, shaking her head in shock. "Mrs. Gerard's husband said that she never made it home this evening. They wanted to see if we knew anything about her. I told them she'd been at the store, but that I hadn't seen her since about 4 o'clock. Benjamin sat down his pizza. He looked out the window toward the nursery, recalling the last sight he'd had of Mrs. G. Strolling deeper into the warehouse, he hesitated before he spoke. When he did, he was surprised at his own words. "I wonder if the thing in the warehouse got her." Benjamin's mother stared at him in surprise. "What are you talking about?" she asked. Benjamin took a deep breath. "I mean, for the longest time, I've had this feeling that something's been living in there. I didn't want to say anything because I didn't think you'd believe me, but tonight I heard this noise, way up in the branches." His mom stared at him in horror. "I wonder if something could have hitched a ride from Africa," she mumbled. "Like an animal or a snake." Benjamin shrugged, wide-eyed. "Maybe something attacked Mrs. Gerard," she gasped. "Right in our nursery." She picked up the phone again and called the police. 2 police cars pulled up a short while later and parked in front of the warehouse, emergency lights flashing. The officers told Ben and his mom to stay in their house. They sat silently in the living room, watching the red lights reflecting off the leaves of the potted plants that surrounded them. Benjamin kept waiting for the sounds of gunfire, or a lion's roar, or even a cop yelling out. "There it is," to the others, but nothing like that happened. Finally, they saw a tall policeman with a mustache making his way up to their house. They opened the door for him, and he nodded and handed Benjamin's mother his business card. "We appreciate your calling us, and you can do it again if you think of something," he said politely, studying both Benjamin and his mother's faces with his gray eyes. "But we searched every single square foot in that building, and we couldn't find signs that anything more dangerous than a couple of mosquitoes are living in there. We're sure there must be some other explanation for Mrs. Gerard's disappearance." Mother and son watched the police units pull away from the parking lot and drive off. Dazed, they wandered into the dining room. Benjamin looked sheepishly at his mother, who toyed with the cop's business card. "Must have been my imagination, huh, Mom?" he said. "I hope so. But it's good to be sure," she said. She slipped the card under the telephone and snagged the white box on the table. With a deft motion of one hand, she flipped open its lid. "Anyone for cold pizza?" she asked with a smile. The next day was Saturday, and Things from the Jungle was having another record day. By noon, Benjamin had given brief tours to a school teacher, a hotel operator, several tourists, 2 gardeners, and 1 memorable family with 3 misbehaving red-headed kids. They had to put the closed sign up at 1 o'clock so Benjamin and his mother could take a few minutes out for lunch. They sat in her office while both munched on leftover pizza. Ben's mom had wanted to take their break in the nursery so she could go over the sales receipts while they ate. Benjamin sighed and listened idly to the ticking noise from their calculator. "Thank goodness we're closed on Sundays," he thought. "We're going to need a day just to sit," and suddenly his thoughts were interrupted by a loud rustling noise swishing through the branches somewhere in the warehouse. It was just like the sound Benjamin had heard the previous night. Something huge seemed to be leaping from tree to tree. He stopped chewing, his mother stopped typing. Both stared at each other, speechless. The noise stopped. Mother and son walked carefully out of the office, looking about the nursery with bulging eyes. Everything seemed normal. "Did you hear it?" Benjamin whispered. "Yes," she said. Then, turning to face the warehouse, she called out, "Is there anyone in there?" The only sound was the traffic rushing by the outside. That night, a knock fell on the nursery's front door just after closing time. It was the same mustached policeman who had visited them the previous evening. "I'm terribly sorry to be bothering you again," he said as they opened the door, "but we've had a report that some other people have disappeared." "Other people? Disappeared?" Benjamin's mother asked, confused. "What does that have to do with us?" "Well, I stopped by because I noticed that their vehicle appears to be parked in your parking lot. He pointed out the window at a dented minivan parked there. With all the traffic in and out of their little lot all day, neither of them had noticed it. Benjamin's mom clapped her hand over her mouth in surprise. Benjamin just stared, a strange idea coming into focus in his mind. What do they look like? He asked quietly. The officer took out a snapshot and held it up. Before them was a picture of a mother, father, and 3 red-headed children. His mom was starting to shake her head to indicate that she hadn't seen them, but Benjamin nodded. Yes, he said quickly. They were here. I showed them around, but they didn't buy anything. I thought they must have left. A sharp look came into the policeman's gray eyes. What time was this? Benjamin swallowed. About 11:30, he said, before lunch. Mind if I look around the warehouse again? The policeman asked. Please do, his mother said. Ben and his mother simply sat at the desk in the office, speechless. A mental film of the family replayed itself over and over again in Benjamin's head. A weird detail stuck in his mind. Everyone in the family had worn bright yellow tennis shoes. He went on to remember how all 3 red-headed kids kept taking off and running away from their exasperated parents. Had one of the little ones led the rest of them deeper into the warehouse? To that spot where the rustling noise kept coming from? I didn't see anything back there, the cop said, reappearing at the office door. But those plants you have are so thick it's kind of hard to tell. He looked toward the 2 and offered them a tight-lipped smile. Look, it's possible their van wouldn't start after they came in here and that they either walked or got a ride. I'll have to get back to you. You have my card. Please call my number if they turn up. With that, he began walking toward the door. Alarmed, Benjamin's mom stood up. Is there anything else we can do? She asked. Well, yes, the officer said, turning back towards them one final time. Why don't you keep your nursery closed until we figure out exactly what's going on here? Benjamin's mother nodded grimly and watched the tall policeman let himself out. That night, Benjamin was restless again. For hours he simply lay on one side, staring out his window at the warehouse, different explanations flittering through his mind. At midnight, Benjamin was still wide awake, and he noticed a long shadow moving in the alleyway at the side of the nursery. He sat straight up in bed to see over the soft outlines of potted plants his mother had placed along his sill. Something was creeping toward the window near the warehouse door, approaching from the direction of the parking lot. In the midnight gloom, Benjamin couldn't quite tell what it was, but whatever it was caused a chill to run through him. He got out of bed and pressed his nose to the glass. A man was fiddling with the window. In another second, he had taken the entire window off, and as he turned to lay it against the wall, a glint of moonlight stole through the clouds and lit up his face. Ben recognized the long white hair of Chester. Ben watched the old man climb through the window of the warehouse. How long has Chester known how to get in that way? Benjamin wondered. Is he looking for a place to sleep, or does he have some other business in there? Benjamin quickly threw on some clothes. Chester must be behind all the disappearances, he thought excitedly. But I'd better be sure before I drag the police out here again. Benjamin walked quietly through the dark house, took the key off the ring of the hook under the kitchen counter, then carefully slipped out into the moonlight. Walking slowly, carefully not to make a sound, Benjamin approached the warehouse window. At last he reached the sill Chester had climbed over to enter the warehouse. He hesitated, wondering if he dared go in that way. Chester could be right there, just waiting for him. Benjamin decided the door would be safer. Ever so slowly, Benjamin crept around to the front entrance and inserted the key in the keyhole. But when he turned the knob, it wouldn't give. Was someone holding the knob from the other side of the door? He tried again, and with a sigh of relief, he realized that the key simply needed a little bit more pressure. In an instant, the door swung open and he was inside the dark showroom. Blinking, trying to adjust his eyes to the dimness, Benjamin could hardly see a thing through the thick masses of plants that absorbed any light coming through the windows. He had to get back to the office and turn on the lights. Taking a deep breath, Benjamin walked towards the office, using his memory of how the building was laid out to find his way. Plants seemed to reach out and touch him as he passed. At any second, he expected a hand to grab him out of the blackness. Finally, he made it to the office. As he extended his hand towards the light switches, the familiar rustling noise swished through the warehouse, followed by a man's scream. Benjamin jumped and his fingers flipped one switch. A single bank of lights flickered on, casting light on only one side of the warehouse. The scream echoed again, becoming muffled at the end. Someone obviously needed help, and needed it now. Forgetting about the rest of the lights, Benjamin entered the warehouse, squinting at the shadows. Something was moving wildly up ahead. Benjamin moved cautiously forward, looking up into the canopy of the jungle trees. Then, he saw something that made his heart stop. A vine was pulling Chester up to the treetops. Chester's feet and legs kicked and struggled in midair. The upper part of his body was entirely engulfed by the massive vine which wrapped around his torso. Benjamin, horrified, took a step back. Above him, hidden just under huge leaves, were other human shapes. They hung motionless in the clutching vines, just like plucked chickens. From the bottom of one particularly small bundle dangled a small pair of bright yellow tennis shoes. Benjamin screamed. At the same time, the vines hauling up Chester paused, as if listening. A huge mass of vines moving with incredible speed suddenly dropped from the trees at the side of the warehouse. The action was accompanied by a loud rustling. They reached out, and with precision of a giant's fist, they smashed into the bank of lights Benjamin had turned on. The fluorescent tubes cracked like matchsticks, and the nursery went dark. Benjamin looked around, gasping in shock. He could not see a thing. Which way was it to the door? He hesitated, turning this way and that, his sense of direction gone. Above him, the rustling sound grew louder still. Probing tendrils tickled his face. Suddenly, a thicker vine moved up from behind him and tried to loop itself around his throat. Tugging it away, Benjamin turned and plunged into the opposite direction. Toppling over small trees, tripping over bushes, Benjamin ran through the pitch darkness. Vines crawled out after him the entire way, snatching at his legs, grabbing his arms, yanking his hair. Finally, the darkness parted. He saw the moon, still riding high in the clouds, through the window. He had made it to the front of the building. Safety was only a few feet away. Still going full speed, Benjamin yanked at the doorknob and tumbled down to the front steps in the parking lot. Panting and stunned, he lay there for a moment, thinking he had never seen anything as beautiful as the night sky overhead. But the clatter of breaking glass filled the night air around him. He stared in disbelief as 3 monstrous vines shot through the shattered window, coming after him, but only a few feet away, then abruptly stopped. Benjamin slowly realized that their roots anchored them from somewhere inside. Defeated, the pulsing stalks slithered snake-like back into the building. Benjamin picked himself up and ran toward his house. It wasn't wild animals. It wasn't other people, he thought, rehearsing what he would tell the cop on the phone. Some weird kind of jungle plant was behind the disappearances. Benjamin let himself inside and hurried to the phone. He fished out the policeman's card and began dialing. But before he could reach the last number, something closed over one ankle. As he kicked, trying to free himself, another tiny vine wrenched the phone receiver out of his hand, and another one grabbed his other arm. He looked around the room in amazement. The vines came from the pots all around, the pots his mother had planted with clippings from the nursery. He turned to call for her, only to see that her bedroom door was open. Her body was covered in green vines, streaming from the pots all around her bed. The body was not moving. Benjamin's other leg was entrapped by vines now, and a particularly big one was squeezing his chest. All of a sudden, he could hardly move, but he found that he could scream. And Benjamin kept screaming, right until the moment the vines wrapped themselves firmly over his mouth. Ooh, boy, okay. Yeah, boy, that was something. That got me. Oh, hey, this is from the Booth and Dimmock Memorial Library in Coventry, Connecticut. Published in 1997. Sorry, I got distracted. Man, okay, so I got really into that one. Good story, a little different from the others. There was no comeuppance in that one, which a lot of these stories are about kids that are terrible. This one was a little bit more scary in that way. All right. Let's see what you guys are saying. And I desperately need a drink of water because, oh my gosh. My throat is, you can probably hear it getting dry. So let's see. Thank you so much. Oh my goodness, I've got to figure out how to say this name. Stephanie Vizuete? I apologize if I'm saying your name wrong, but she said, story time, dem bones. Thank you for the tip. Awesome. Very cool. Okay. Let's see what you guys are saying. Oh dear, is it not going to load more? Sorry, the chat room's giving me a little bit of a challenge. Just like the dentist that Audrey ate. Little Shop of Horrors. Yikes. Run, Forrest, run. Ray Cersei said, the trees are alive. Patrick Lamba, is it just me or does everybody picture the characters in these stories to all look like Kuto? Even the mom in the last one had a big curly mustache. Spooky. That is terrifying. Which is more likely, the vines are killing people or the kid is a sociopath? Tony Giannot, I actually thought this one might have a happy ending, but nope. Heather Fairchild said, Jumanji game gone terribly wrong. Patrick Lamba, more immediate danger for the characters. Mark Shields, so, will anyone ever find the people? I guess that's up to your imagination and how dark of one you have. Woo. I need just a second for my poor voice. I think hopefully it's allergies. Everybody's saying that right now. Hopefully it's allergies. But I enjoyed that one. That one was a lot of fun. So, of course, I'll mention, tips are appreciated but not required. But hit that share button. We've got at least one more story for the night. So hit that damn share button. Pardon my French. I try to keep it family friendly, but I got too excited. Hit that share button and help us have more people join us for some fun. So, but everybody enjoyed some plant mischief. I also want to mention, I got distracted because I noticed that this book, like I said, it's from a Connecticut library. Apparently, it has the library card in the back. It was last checked out November 16th, 2011. It's kind of cool. Patrick Lamba said, nope, he got the Rona. Jason P. Weinram said, I hope it's allergies too. Thank you. Luckily, I leave the house very little. I mean, lately, obviously. So, let's see. All right, looks like you guys are having a good time. What do you think, friends? I definitely got one more in me. It seems like we've got time for one more. What do you guys think? Ready for me to soldier forward? All right. Patrick said, I lost the game. Don't we all? All right. Oh, Keith Tomlin said, wait, you're not in the woods, faker? I am totally in the woods. I'm surprised for how quickly I put this set together, how like reasonably convincing it can be. All right. Well, it's time for our final story of the night. Tony just said one more story. So here we go. The final scary story of the night, the final scary story we're going to read from tonight's Scary Stories for Sleepovers number 8. Let's see where we're headed. This story is called The Black Balloon. Oscar's parents started preparing for the party at about 11 in the morning. First, I saw them sweep the patio and clean off the outside chairs. Next, his dad rigged up the piñata, hanging it from a hook on the porch ceiling. Then both his mom and dad started to twist streamers through the railings. They also stretched them in arcs from one end of the patio to the other. They were really going all out for his birthday party, but I wondered why. Hadn't they ever stopped to consider what a little jerk their son was? I sighed and went into my apartment for a soda. When I came out, I sat down at the table on my own patio. Looked around the complex. Most of the other patios had some signs of kids in the family. Mountain bikes leaning against the walls, skateboards propped up by the front doors. This complex was basically loaded with kids. And I knew for a fact that I was the only one of them not invited to Oscar's birthday party. I grunted and took a sip of soda. What made the whole thing even worse was that both our apartments were on the ground floor, and mine was right across from Oscar's. That meant I could hear everything that would happen, and I have a very clear view of the party. At first, I planned to spend the day inside, but then I decided I would force myself to watch the entire event. If Oscar looked over and saw me sitting here with a bored expression on my face, maybe he realized that I wouldn't have wanted to come to his stupid party even if he had invited me. After a few minutes, his parents began setting up plastic chairs. Next, they brought out card tables, and decorated them with bright tablecloths. Finally, his dad squirted lighter fluid over the coals in their portable barbecue and lit it so the coals would be ready by party time. Not once during all this preparation did I see Oscar himself. I suppose he was sitting in the house like a little king, waiting for his subjects to come and pay him respect. I sipped my soda and waited. A little before 12:30, the first guests arrived. I knew every one of them, either from school or here at the apartment complex. He'd invited both boys and girls, and after a while I saw Tommy Robinson and Hank Melendez come walking up, both holding gifts. They were the buddies from my Little League team who had told me about Oscar's party to begin with. As they walked in his gate, they turned and waved at me. I tried to put a smile on my face as I waved back to them. Finally, the great boy himself came out of his house. I looked at Oscar's plump little face with a feeling of distaste. I had never liked him much. He was kind of a bully, the type of kid who picks on smaller kids and likes to boss people around. In fact, his meanness was the very reason we were enemies. Once I saw him kicking a neighbor's kitten, so I went and told the neighbor. Old Oscar got in a load of trouble over that, and he never forgave me. That was why he was over there having a party and I was over here sitting alone on my porch. I drained my soda can and crushed it, pretending it was Oscar's head. The party went on predictably for a while. His dad put some burgers and hot dogs on the barbecue while the kids played some lame party games. They took a break to eat, then everyone lined up to whack the piñata. When it was Oscar's turn, I distinctly saw him peek under his blindfold before he swung the bat. Typical, I thought. I was on my third soda before things started getting really interesting. That was when I saw the wizard walking down the central sidewalk of the complex. What he really was, of course, was an actor or an entertainer dressed like a wizard, but boy, did he have a great costume. A white beard that came down to the middle of his chest, long flowing purple robes, and a peaked purple hat to match. And what an expression on his face! He looked as if he were ready to cast a spell on the first person who looked at him sideways. As the wizard let himself in Oscar's gate, I was wishing for the first time that I had been invited to the party. "Okay, everyone, the magician's here," Oscar's mom announced. The kids finished scooping up the fallen piñata candy and sat on the chairs. For a second, the wizard just stared at them. Then he raised both hands in the air and clapped them twice. A little, a spark and a great puff of smoke rose from between his fingers. Then he spoke. His voice was deep and commanding. I am Zatlin, the wizard, and... The wizard stared at the faces in front of him before picking out Oscar. You are Oscar, the birthday boy, am I correct? Oscar rolled his eyes. Good trick, he said sarcastically. My parents must have shown you my picture, right? Zatlin frowned. Do you doubt my magical powers? He asked sternly. Oscar snorted. Anybody could wear a purple dress and set off some cheap fireworks, he said with a sneer. He looked around to see if any of his guests were laughing, but they were all ignoring him, eager to see what Zatlin would do next. I wasn't laughing either. I thought the magician was pretty impressive, and more than anything, I was wishing he would turn Oscar into a frog or something. The wizard continued to perform his tricks, and they were all good ones. He made doves appear from his fingertips, linked and unlinked rings, and made the birthday cake levitate in the air. After each trick, just like clockwork, Oscar made some rude comment. For his last effect, Zatlin made numerous helium balloons appear from under his cloak. I was completely amazed at that one. I couldn't figure out where he had been hiding them, but the trick got even more surprising after he handed a different colored balloon to each kid. Hey, Missy Johnson said, how did you know green is my favorite color? Tommy Robinson smiled and held up his balloon. Orange is mine! How did you do that anyway? The wizard only smiled. The others all began to talk excitedly, everyone proclaiming that the magician had somehow managed to give them a balloon of their own favorite color. Finally, he turned to Oscar, to whom he had given a bright red balloon. Well? Zatlin asked. I saw Oscar's face kind of twist as he looked at his balloon. Nope, he said. You screwed up. My favorite color has always been blue. At this, the wizard turned away and began gathering up his doves and magic tricks. I could barely contain myself at that one. Oscar's bedroom was clearly visible from my place, and I knew he had red wallpaper and a red bedspread. Not only that, red-colored clothing was about the only thing he wore. He had lied, simply to make the magician look bad. I watched as the wizard said his goodbyes, and all the kids thanked him, except, of course, for Oscar, who was digging into his store of piñata candy. Then Zatlin let himself out the gate. But instead of leaving the way he had come in, he turned on his heel and came right across the courtyard toward my apartment. I sat up in my chair, surprised to see that he seemed to be looking at me. The wizard strolled right up to my patio and stopped. He stared right into my eyes. I was a little shocked when I noticed that his beard and bushy white eyebrows were real. I liked your magic, I said awkwardly, trying to fill the silence. And I know you were right about Oscar's balloon. Didn't you get invited? Zatlin asked bluntly. I could only shake my head. Oscar and I aren't the best of friends, I mumbled. The wizard's penetrating eyes seemed to consider me. All at once he reached into his cloak and brought out one more balloon. Its color was a shiny black. I know this isn't your color, but I have a feeling it will liven up your afternoon, he said carefully, handing it to me. Don't do anything you'll regret, he added mysteriously. Then he turned with a swirl of his robe and strode up the sidewalk. I simply sat there at first, shocked that he'd approached me. Across the way, the birthday cake was being cut. No one at the party seemed to have noticed that I had been visited by the wizard. I looked at the black balloon, wondering how in the world it was going to liven up my afternoon. I kind of wished he'd come up with a purple balloon. At least it would have been my favorite color. Watching the kids eat their cake was pretty boring, so I amused myself making little squeaky noises by rubbing the top of the balloon. Then I happened to look over at the party. Oscar was scratching at the top of his head, exactly where I'd been rubbing the balloon. I chuckled. What a weird coincidence. I rubbed the balloon again. Oscar set down his fork on his cake and sat down his fork on his cake plate and scratched at his head. This was too strange. I stared at the balloon, trying to see if there was anything unusual about it, but all I could see was a normal black rubber balloon tied with kite string. Then I rubbed it again, a little lower this time. Oscar set down his fork and again scratched himself, but now he was scratching his forehead. had that magician given me anyway? I wondered. Had he meant the balloon to do this? Then I realized that of course he had meant it, and he had left it up to me, the one kid who wasn't invited to the party, to do with it as I wish. I looked over. The cake eating was finished, and now everyone lined up in front of Oscar's chair, waiting to give him presents. I had a fair idea how he might react to his presents. It might be time that Oscar, the kitten kicker, was taught a lesson. So I got the balloon all ready and settled back into my chair. The first party guest in line was Missy Johnson. Oscar snatched the gift from her hands without even reading the card. "I picked it out myself," she said nervously. "I hope you like it." Oscar's chubby fingers tore into the box, and in another instant he had uncovered a red shirt. Missy must have noticed Oscar's true favorite color as well, I thought. "I hope you don't think I'm going to wear this," Oscar sneered. "This is just about the ugliest shirt that I—" "No," I said under my breath. "Bad, Oscar." And I gave the right side of the balloon a mighty flick with my forefinger. "Ow!" Oscar suddenly shrieked, lifting both hands toward his right ear. "What's the matter, Oscar?" Missy said, confused. I don't know," he answered, feeling his tender ear. "For a second there, it was like a bee just stung me or something." I could not keep from smiling. The next kid in line was Stanley Kabowski. He was one of the shortest kids in school and was very shy about it. He held up a brightly wrapped present to the birthday boy. "Thanks, shrimp," Oscar said mockingly. He held the gift up, just out of Stanley's reach. "Gee, I hope I'll be able to open this now. I'm a little short on time. Maybe I'll be able to open it up shortly." That's when I clapped my hand over the lower part of the balloon, right where a mouth would be. Oscar mumbled, his lips suddenly pressed tightly together. He started to look distressed, so I let go of the balloon. "Are you okay?" Stanley asked, concern showing on his face. Oscar panted for a second, running his fingers over his lips. "Of course I'm okay, short stuff," he started to say, but I stopped him. He concluded. This time he dropped the present and tried to pry his jaws open. I slowly released my hold on the balloon. I watched Oscar carefully as he opened up Stanley's gift, which was a new baseball, but he seemed hesitant to say anything mean. So I kept my hand off the balloon. Maybe he was actually learning. The third person in line was Jeff Trulio. Jeff had kind of a long face and had been given the nickname Peanut Head. I was all ready for this one. Oscar took the present and opened the box, revealing a nice digital watch. He started out well enough. "Thanks," he said at first, but then Oscar couldn't resist adding just a little put down. "Peanut Head." "We'll see who the Peanut Head is, Oscar," I said in a low voice, and I carefully stretched the balloon from the top to the bottom. I looked over. Oscar's face actually grew longer, less plump and less plump the further I stretched the balloon. Soon his head looked so much like a peanut that Jeff's looked perfectly normal next to his. I let go, allowing the balloon and Oscar's face to return to normal. Oscar held his face in both hands, obviously wondering what had happened. Jeff, who was the only one at the party who saw the rubbery face he'd made, was stunned. "Wow, Oscar, how did you do that? That was even better than the magician's tricks," he cried. Oscar only shook his head, falling back into a chair in exhaustion. The next guest was Peggy Stoker. Peggy had always been just a little on the heavy side. Not that Oscar could talk, but I knew he wouldn't be able to resist a comment. I was right. Immediately after he unwrapped the model car she'd given him, he thanked her, then weakly started to ask her how many pieces of cake she'd had today. So I socked it to him, flattening the top and bottom ends of the balloon so that the middle squished out. In a second, Oscar's head was exactly the same shape as a Halloween pumpkin. By now, the other kids were getting kind of scared by Oscar's weird expressions and behavior. As for Oscar himself, I could see by the look on his face that he wouldn't be making any more mean comments for a long, long time. I should have stopped there, I know. I had probably done everything the magician had intended when he gave me the balloon, but I just couldn't. I was getting carried away by the power I had over Oscar. For one thing, I began to wonder what would happen if I just let go of the balloon string. Would Oscar's silly head go floating off his shoulders? Curious, I leaned over the sidewalk and let the balloon go up clear to the top of its string, just to test it out. I was a little disappointed to see that Oscar's head stayed right where it was. He did seem to act dizzy, though. And that gave me another idea. I took the balloon and began winding it around winding it around on its string over and over again for about a minute. Then, still holding onto the string, of course, I let it go. The balloon twirled and spun. I looked over at the patio across the way. Hank Melendez had been trying to hand Oscar his present when suddenly Oscar became so dizzy he fell out of his chair. Hank and the rest of the partygoers stood over him asking him what was wrong, but Oscar couldn't say a thing until the balloon stopped unwinding. That's when I took the balloon and started slapping the sides. Oscar cried out and put his head in his hands. The kids called for his mother, who came out and looked into her son's eyes. "I've got a terrible headache, Mom," Oscar whined, and with that, the party was over. The kids filed out, telling Oscar they hoped he felt better soon. I stopped slapping the balloon. A horrible thought had just hit me. If I accidentally popped the balloon, would Oscar's head explode? And then, the wizard's last words came back to me. "Don't do anything you'll regret." I watched Oscar's mom help him to the bedroom, and I decided it was over. I'd taught him some lessons and really messed up the party he'd never invited me to. I never really wanted to hurt him, but there wasn't too much difference between what I'd been doing and kicking kittens when you got down to it. Now the question was, what should I do with the balloon? I couldn't exactly let it go, and I sure didn't want to keep it. Finally it hit me. I would sneak over and tie it to the railing on Oscar's fence. They could deal with it. When no one was looking, I made my way across the courtyard. The curtains on Oscar's bedroom window were closed, but as I passed by I could hear his mother murmuring to her son inside. Her voice must have distracted me as I leaned over to tie the string to the railing. Suddenly, I looked up to see that the black balloon was bumping against the patio ceiling. As I watched, terrified, the bottom of the balloon brushed against the hook Oscar's father had used for the piñata. Terrified, I yanked the balloon down and examined it. A small hole had been torn in the loose rubber. "Oh no," I breathed, as I watched, helpless. The black balloon puffed out a steady, feeble jet of air. Slowly it shriveled in my hands until it was the size of a crumpled black flower. Even worse were the screams of the woman and the boy. Oh man. Oh man, that was cruel. I liked that one, but that was cruel. Let's see what you guys thought. Man, that was pretty brutal. I mean, yeah, that was pretty brutal. A voodoo balloon. Yeah, let's see what you guys said about it. Patrick Lamba. Oh, wait, here we go. Best title. Mark Shields, best title of the entire series. Michelle said, "Wait, it's in first person." That's what I was thinking too. That's the first story we've read so far on all of Uncle Henny's Campfire stories that was in first person. And then Morgan Moore said, "FPS first person spooky." Yes. Ladies love it when you're bossy. That's what Patrick said. Patrick said, "Balloons." The jerk. Morgan said, "This Oscar kid is going to get it bad." Patrick Lamba said he was asking for it, that's for sure. Squeaky, squeaky, squeak. Mark Shields said, "Yep, not often do you root for the kid to get what is coming to him." Patrick Lamba, "It's actually Nutty American. The peanut head is their word." Oh, man. Patrick Lamba, "The narrator is kind of a sadistic jerk." Jason Wyram, "That was a cool, brutal ending. I agree." Tony Giannot said, "I want to say the kid deserved it, but that was a lot, LOL." And then Craig Cohen said, "Run!" Well, all right, before we call it, and I thank you guys for hanging out. We try to go as close to 10 o'clock as we can. My voice is starting to get kind of raw, so I think it's a good time to part ways with you all. I really so much appreciate you guys hanging out with me every week. It's very nice to have something to look forward to every Wednesday night. Not only because I get to hang out with you guys, not only because I get to distract myself by reading some scary stories, and not only because you guys have been super generous with tipping and buying merchandise, which I really appreciate a lot. I had mentioned at the start of the show that since I started doing this live stream, I've actually bought all of my groceries and dog food just with your guys' tips while I've been reading. So that's an incredible feeling while I'm kind of trapped in the house out of work trying to figure things out. So thank you guys so much. Thank you so much for listening to the spookiness with me. Let's see what you guys are saying. Jason said, thank you, Henny. My pleasure. Tony said, thank you for another great Wednesday night. My pleasure. Patrick Lemba said, close us out. I'm going to close you guys out by saying thank you again. I'll be right back here next Wednesday at 8 o'clock Eastern. We're going to read the rest of Scary Stories for Sleepovers number 8. And then we're going to open... Let me see if I can reach one. We're going to open mystery packages, which have new other books in the Scary Story line. That way it can be random and creepy like that. So thank you all so much. Sad I missed the last 2 weeks because of finals. No problem, Patrick. Don't worry about it. Craig Cohen said, thank you so much, Henrik. Wednesday nights have become a highlight of the week. Mine too, man. Morgan Moore said, as always, another fun Wednesday night. Thank you, guys. So I will see you all, hopefully, next Wednesday. And you take care and be scared, but also have a little bit of fun. Good night.